My name is Katie. Sitting here in this cabin in Vermont, surrounded by the snow-covered mountains and the gentle crackling of the fireplace, I'm reminded of how far I've come. It's been 2 months since that fateful Thanksgiving, a night that changed my life forever. It was a typical Thanksgiving gathering at first. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, and the 20-foot mahogany table was set with Wedgwood china and baccarat crystal. There were around 30 relatives in the large, opulent dining room of my grandfather's mansion in Beverly Hills. I was seated at the far end, near the kitchen door, as always. My sister, Lily, was 29 and had always been the apple of my parents' eyes. She sat to my 80-year-old grandfather's right, the seat of honor. My mother, Patricia, a haughty socialite, was on his left. My father, Robert, a wealthy corporate lawyer at Thompson & Sons LLP, sat in the third seat. When it was around 6:15 p.m. My mother, looking ice-cold and composed, stood up. She tapped her wine glass gently with a fork, and the room fell silent. "Before we give thanks," she said, her eyes fixed on me, "we need to face the truth. Katie, you were never supposed to be a part of this family. I've carried this mistake for 27 years, and with Dad's illness, we can't keep pretending." I could feel the shock wash over the room. Lily raised her champagne glass and smirked subtly, while my father just stared down at his plate, silent. I was about to stand up and leave this humiliation behind when my grandfather, who was suffering from terminal lung cancer, slammed his fist down on the table so hard that the crystal glasses shattered. "Enough," he growled, his voice that of a battle-hardened general. "The truth isn't about Katie. The truth, Patricia, is about you." He slid a thick manila folder across the table. "Inside this folder are the things that will expose your lies. Let me take you back to how this nightmare began. I was born on April 20th, 1998. Lily was born 3 years earlier on July 15th, 1995. We grew up in a 7,000-square-foot mansion in Beverly Hills, filled with expensive antiques and modern art. Our family was known in the social circles as the epitome of wealth and status. But from a young age, I knew I didn't quite fit in. Lily always got the better treatment. She had a 16 by 18-foot bedroom with a balcony overlooking the pool, while mine was a 10 by 12-foot room facing the alley. When I was 12, I asked my mother why. She just said, "Lily is the future of the family. She has more needs." On Lily's 18th birthday, there was a huge party at a 5-star hotel with a famous DJ and a cake from the best patisserie in the city. On my 18th birthday, I got a card and a simple dinner at home. When Lily got into Harvard, my parents paid for her entire education, which cost over $60,000 a year. When I got into UCLA, I was given only $15,000 in family support, and I had to take out loans to cover the rest. By the time I graduated in 2021, I owed $80,000 in student loans. I asked my father why the difference. He said, "Harvard is a legacy for our family, Katie. UCLA is a great school, but it's not the same." I asked my mother, and she replied, "Some investments are more valuable than others." I thought she meant Lily was smarter, but later I realized she meant Lily was more worthy of their love and money. Thanksgiving dinners always had the same seating arrangement. I was always at the end of the table, like an outsider looking in. In 2020, my grandfather asked my mother, "Why is Katie always at the end?" She smiled sweetly and said, "She likes the privacy, Dad." But I saw something change in his eyes. After that, he started watching me more closely. When I was 20, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. We were in my father's Bentley, on the way back to UCLA. I stared out of the window and said, "Mom, why don't I look like anyone in this family? You have blue eyes, Dad has brown, and Lily looks just like you. I have green eyes and black hair." My mother laughed nervously. "Genetics are unpredictable, Katie. My great-grandmother had green eyes. Some questions are better left alone." That question stayed with me like a dark cloud. I couldn't help but wonder if I was adopted, if I was a mistake. As I got older, I noticed the little things. My mother's hugs for Lily lasted longer. My father's praise for Lily was always louder. And my report cards would get a simple good job, while Lily's would come with expensive gifts. Then, on October 12, 2025, I got a call that shattered my world. It was 2:30 p.m. And I was at a cafe in Santa Monica, sipping on a latte. My phone rang, and it was my father. His voice was shaking. "It's Grandpa. Terminal lung cancer. They say he has weeks, maybe a couple of months." 2 days later, my father called a family meeting at our Beverly Hills mansion. The topic was supposed to be Grandpa's care plan, but I knew it was about the inheritance. We sat in my father's study, surrounded by leather-bound books and expensive paintings. Lily leaned forward and said, "We need to be practical. If Grandpa's assets get tied up in probate, it could take years." My mother looked at me and said, "We should all be on the same page for his sake." I noticed a file labeled contingencies, but I wasn't allowed to see what was inside. The next day, Lily called me. "Katie, you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Maybe you should step aside from the inheritance. Mom and I have handled the family finances for years." I lied and said I'd think about it. Between November 1st and November 26th, Lily called me 8 times. Each call followed the same pattern: small talk, then a push for me to give up my share. On the 8th call, she said, "We're trying to protect you from what's coming." On November 10th, my mother invited me to lunch at a fancy restaurant in Beverly Hills. "Over salads," she said, "have you ever been curious about your biological roots? If you want to do a DNA test, I'd understand." I started to realize that something was very wrong. My father canceled 2 dinners with me in the middle of November. Both times, he said it was a client emergency. But later, I found out he was with my mother and Lily, planning something. The night before Thanksgiving, my mother texted me, "We're something appropriate tomorrow. The whole family will be watching." I knew they were up to no good. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and I reached my grandfather's mansion at 4:30 p.m. The smell of the delicious food wafted through the air, but I felt sick to my stomach. Grandpa greeted me with a warm smile, but I could see the determination in his eyes. At 6 p.m. we all sat down. When my mother made that cruel announcement, I was ready to leave. But then Grandpa stepped in. He opened the folder and pulled out a paternity test. "This test," he said, "proves that Robert isn't Katie's biological father. I had it done in 2018. My father's face turned white. "You knew?" he asked my mother. Then, Grandpa pulled out a private investigator's report. Patricia had a 9-month affair with Henry Thompson, a real estate tycoon and Robert's old client. They met at a charity ball in 1997, and the affair ended in 1998, just after Katie was born. He also showed emails where my mother asked Henry for $90,000 to cover up the affair and to keep me hidden. A canceled check for the same amount was also in the folder. My mother stood up, angry. "This is private." "You had no right," she shouted. Grandpa retorted, "I had every right. I've watched you use Katie as a shield for 27 years. At 7 p.m. my mother left without a word, taking her Hermes bag and slamming the door. Lily ran upstairs crying. By 8 p.m. half of the guests had left, mumbling excuses. At 9:30 p.m. my father called a divorce lawyer. At 11 p.m. Grandpa called me into his study. He gave me a key. Safety deposit box at First National Bank. Number 2017. Everything you need is in there. I asked him why he didn't tell me sooner. He said, "I needed to see who they really were and who you were. And now I know." The next day, I went to the bank. Inside the box, I found a DNA test report, a private investigator's report, a stack of emails, and a letter from Grandpa dated November 18, 2025. There was also a deed to a cabin in Vermont worth $400,000, 1,500 shares of Amazon worth around $300,000, and a payable on death account with $90,000 to clear my student loans. I read Grandpa's letter. He wrote about how he suspected something was wrong when I was 12 and my mother ignored my achievements. He said that when I graduated from UCLA and gave a speech about integrity, he knew I was the only one worth saving. He set up the account to give me back the money my mother took from Henry. Grandpa passed away on December 10, 2025. I was by his side. His last words were, "You're free, Katie. Live an honest life." On December 20th, we gathered at the law offices of Thompson & Sons LLP to read the will. The estate attorney, Gerald Simmons, was a stern-looking man in his 60s. He read, "To my daughter-in-law, Patricia, I leave nothing. Her actions and betrayals are well documented. To my granddaughter, Lily, I leave $200,000, on the condition that she doesn't contest this will. To my son, Robert, I leave $1.5 million and a 35% partnership in the firm, but only if he divorces Patricia within 60 days. To my granddaughter, Katie, I leave a trust fund of $1.2 million, the cabin in Vermont, my late wife's jewelry collection worth $200,000, and the full payment of her student loans." After the will reading, the truth started to leak. By January 2, 2026, the news was all over the Beverly Hills gossip columns. Lily lost her job at a high-end fashion house because of the scandal. My father's biggest client pulled out of a major deal, and his partnership equity in the firm dropped significantly. On January 15, I drove by the Beverly Hills mansion one last time. A for sale sign stood in the front yard. I made the decision to block my mother's and Lily's numbers, their emails, and unfollow them on all social media platforms. I muted my father's notifications. A few days later, I got a message that Henry Thompson wanted to meet. We met at a Starbucks in Beverly Hills. He was a well-dressed man in his 60s. "I'm sorry for everything," he said. "The money, the affair, not being there for you." I looked at him coldly. "You paid my mother to hide me, to hide your mistake. You can't undo 27 years. He asked if there was anything he could do. I said, "Leave me alone. I don't need your apology or your money." The meeting lasted 15 minutes. I left without looking back. I drove back to the Vermont cabin. The snow-covered mountains and the peaceful silence were exactly what I needed. I unpacked the jewelry box and looked at the pictures of me from infancy to now, all labeled by Grandpa. I sat on the porch on January 31st, the cold air on my face. I opened Grandpa's letter one more time. "You're free now, not because of the money, but because you know the truth." I folded the letter and whispered, "Thank you, Grandpa. I'm free." In the end, blood didn't make us a family. My mother chose greed, Lily chose convenience, and my father chose silence. But Grandpa chose me, and his integrity will always be my true inheritance.